On here at the last minute. So welcome. Let me get set up here. I'm Andy Johnson. Welcome to our last ILEC webinar of 2024. We'll have a whole bunch of them coming up in 2025. Topic of today's webinar, as you can see, LETRS, Science of Reading Research Standards, and baloney. And this is part of ILEC, International Literacy Educators Coalition. You see the web address there, and if you want to join, go there, and there's the link where you can join and be a part of the conversation to try to make a difference, to try to empower teachers. That's our goal, is to empower teachers to enable every student to achieve their full literacy potential. That is our purpose. That is our mission. The session tonight, 7 areas there. We'll go for no more than an hour or so. I'll stay at the end and answer questions for as long as you want to go. So, but first, if you can't win the argument, what do? You bully, you threaten, you silence, and you eliminate the academic conversation. We've already won the argument. The meaning-based educators have won the argument in an academic setting. But if you can't win the argument, you pressure lawmakers to pass laws to force compliance. You bully and threaten those who disagree. There are teachers who are afraid to speak out. There are professors who are afraid to speak out. And that's not right. In Wisconsin, teacher prep programs not on the same page as Wisconsin's new reading law. If you can't win the argument in an academic setting, you bully and you threaten. If you can't win the argument in an academic setting, you get organizations to hire lawyers and file baseless lawsuits. A lot of people have sent me emails about this lawsuit happening out there in New Hampshire. And here's how absolutely silly and baseless this lawsuit is. If a student fails in math, can we sue the publishers or curriculum developers? What about science? What about health class? It's just an absurd suit meant to silence people. If you can't win the argument in an academic setting, you bully, threaten, and try to silence those who disagree. And the thing about reading wars, there never was a reading war. Instead, there was a coup by the profiteers and politicians eager for money, power, and control. And again, if you can't win the argument in an academic setting, you bully, threaten, and try to silence those who disagree. In academia, we have these academic conversations, and there's a natural tension. There's people with differing ideas, and we disagree, and that's good. That's how we evolve. But we have these conversations through our academic journals, our conferences, our other ways. We don't try to bully and threaten those who disagree with us. That is not academic discourse. That does not enable our field to evolve and continue to grow. And yes, literacy continues to grow and evolve. It is not a settled science. Science never becomes settled. That's the thing about science. Real science is always evolving. Off on a tangent. First of all, crises. The context of crisis or the illusion of crisis. There have always been people willing to use a crisis or create the illusion of a crisis for personal benefits. And that's what is happening today. There is not a crisis of reading achievement in the US. And when people say that, we should question them. Now we're going to take a look at the National Assessment of Educational Progress, part of the US Department of Education. This provides some data. It's not the end all of everything, but it provides some good data. And we see that scores have been relatively constant over the years. Now, National Assessment of Educational Progress, every 2 years, they take a representative sample from across the country in grades 4, 8, and 12. They do this in reading, and math, but they also do it in writing, science, and other areas. And they break it down by states. Now, here's the thing about science. You can't randomly determine causality. You can't say, Wisconsin is better than Texas because Wisconsin's doing this and Texas is not doing that. You can't randomly assign variables. You can't say, scores are going down. It must be because of the reading program. There are far too many variables involved. This just gives us a sense of what is. Rinkin, Ruby, and Risco, among others, this is the most recent, there is no irrefutable evidence that we are experiencing a national literacy crisis. No, there is not. There is not. A crisis would look like that. But it doesn't. It looks like that. Scores have been relatively stable from 1971, when they started collecting this data, up to 2022. And you see we're a little above where we were back then. But scores have remained relatively stable. We have to question these assumptions. People will insist there's a crisis. They will insist the sky is falling down. But for the sake of an argument, even if there were a crisis, which there was not, science of reading claims to have isolated the causal variable. They have determined both the cause and the solution to a problem that does not exist. And that's not science. That's what's called baloney. These things are all things that impact student learning. These are just some of the many variables that impact learning. It's because they're not teaching phonics. You've isolated that variable, have you? Interesting. It's because of the balanced literacy. Very interesting. You've isolated the variable. How amazing of you. Sorry. NAEP data has 4 categories: advanced, proficient, and basic. Okay. Some people will say, there's a reading crisis because advanced scores are going down and such and such. These categories, levels, and the content of these tests are arbitrarily defined. Now, let's take a look. A difference between a norm reference test and a criterion reference test. A norm reference test compares you to a normal population, hence the term norm reference. And in a normal population, half the population is going to be below the mean. That's called normal. NAEP basic level, yes, half the population is going to be below NAEP basic level. That's called normal. Normal. State tests are most often criterion reference tests. This is where you establish a criterion that must be met. You say 3rd graders should know this, 6th graders should know that, but it's an arbitrarily defined set of criterion, as we'll see in just a minute. And most state tests are given every year at each grade level. NAEP data every 2 years, grades 4, 8, and 12, and a representative sample. That's the difference. But in these criterion reference tests, I ask you, who decides the criteria? Who decided the content of a criterion reference test? Who decides what's advanced, proficient, and basic? And how are these decisions made? We need to do a little investigating on this. And I did that. I looked at the Minnesota comprehensive exams for reading in Minnesota. And it's kind of tough. It's buried in their website, and you have to ask questions and call the Minnesota Department of Education and ask some more. And I was finally able to figure this out. They took the three-dimensional content core state standard benchmark standards, and that defines what students should know or be able to do, and they converted them into a two-dimensional criterion reference test. That's how they came up with the state test in Minnesota. That is not unlike other states. Now, a criterion reference test. This is what CCSS said that third graders should know or be able to do. And how often in your adult life have you had to do any of these? This doesn't mean we shouldn't include them in a curriculum, but defining one's literacy by your ability to distinguish among literary elements, plot, characterization, setting, and themes, that's kooky talk. Pardon my salty language. Who decided that third graders needed to be able to do these things? They took these standards and they put them into a two-dimensional test with bubbles to fill out. And these, are they an end or a means to an end? And what is the end? This again is for third graders. And in Minnesota, they claim that test scores were falling, but no test scores were ever reported. How do they do that? Instead, they reported percentages in 4 arbitrarily defined categories, and you see them here. Test scores are falling, they said, and they printed percentages of students falling in each category. And here's the thing. You can compare second grade in one year to second grade in another year, but it's not an apt comparison because the students are different. When you're looking at second grade scores across, these are different populations. Different populations. If you want an apt comparison, you'd look at the same group moving through. Percentages at or above proficiency is not a comparison of scores over time. And in Minnesota, they even tell you in the small print that these scores should not be used for yearly comparison, but people do, and they do. Small print, important to read the small print. So, reading is creating meaning with print, not sounding out words. We read for two purposes: to understand information and to enjoy books. That's the end state. That's the goal. So we have to ask ourselves, what are the baby steps towards that goal? What are the objectives that lead to that end state? That's what we should be doing for both instruction and assessment. Context matters. Part 2. You cannot truly understand the thing unless you understand the context in which the thing is found. A letter is found in the context of a word the context of a sentence. Facts, data are all found in context. Human beings are found in a context to understand them. Research is found in the context of other research studies, found in the context of a theory, found in the context of a paradigm. You can't pull things out in isolation and try to understand them. That's not how reality works. A simple definition, run, has a lot of different meanings depending on the context of the sentence. Context matters. The context of letters. The context of letters is money. Now, I looked up on my Google machine, and it said LETRS is owned by Lexia, annual revenue between $100 million and $500 million. And the parent group of Lexia, which is Cambium Learning, annual revenue $250 to $750 million. And I know that's Google, it's not that trustworthy. My Alexa app said Dr. Louisa Moats is worth $20 million. Again, not reliable sources of information, but seemingly these are more reliable than Lexia or Dr. Moats. Why do I mention that? Again, LETRS must be understood in the context of money, in the context of the social, political, and economic environment. There's a need now to try to disempower and control teachers, to take away their ability to make the decisions about their students. We want creative, knowledgeable, intelligent teachers in our field, absolutely. But we take away their ability to be creative, to be knowledgeable, to be intelligent. We tell them just to shut up and follow directions, follow the manual. There are schools that even go around to make sure teachers are teaching with fidelity. And do they have the manual on their lap? And are they reading exactly what it says from the manual? And if you're not teaching with fidelity, I guess you're an infidel. Trying to disempower and control, trying to delegitimize public education. Public education is the backbone of a democratic society. It's a way for all to achieve. And this need to make money, make no mistake about it, LETRS, as I'll show you tonight, is not an academic act. And I'll say that again. And I know there's LETRS people watching tonight, and I welcome you. LETRS is not an academic act, it's an economic act. Context matters. To make good decisions, and we want our policymakers and our teachers and our administration to be able to make good decisions about what's best for our students. We need information that's beyond true. We need information that's accurate, yes, but that's understood within the context in which it's found. It has to be accurate, but understood within the context. Information always occurs in some context. It's not just floating out in space. Yes, if you teach phonics, students are very likely to score higher on measures of phonics. Absolutely, absolutely. And if you teach phonics, students will score higher on phonics measures, higher than those who have not been taught phonics. Absolutely true. Technically true, but purposefully inaccurate. This does not mean that all students need heavy doses of phonics. Students will be better readers if they get more phonics. More phonics is better than less phonics. Phonics is a key variable in learning to read. Anything other than phonics instruction should be excluded. Phonics should be taught at all ages and levels. Phonics skills transfer to authentic reading situations. A skills-based approach emphasizing phonics is more effective than a meaning-based approach. Phonics is necessary for all readers, and phonics is sufficient for all readers. Yet those types of research studies that show if you teach phonics, students score higher in measures of phonics have been used to justify all these things. If you teach something, students are going to score higher on measures of that something. Absolutely. If you teach one group something and another group nothing, one group is going to score higher on measures of that something, but that does not mean that something is good for anything. It could be good for nothing. Technically true, but purposefully, that should be inaccurate, not accurate. So let us take a look at science of reading and science of reading research standards. This is important. This gets to the heart of it. You know, I come across people and they say, are you teaching science of reading? Are you a science of reading teacher? Do you teach science of reading in your reading methods class? Are you doing science of reading at your school? And what in the dickens do they actually mean by this? What is the science of reading? And again, we must question these basic assumptions. We can't assume that everyone is on the same page because they are not. They are not. So, trying to help us understand what the science of reading is, let us go to the good Dr. Moats. She defines science of reading as the emerging consensus from many disciplines based on literally thousands of studies, supported by hundreds of millions of research dollars conducted across the world in many languages. Sounds beautiful, pretty words, but it doesn't really get us anyplace. So, Dr. Shanahan can help us out a little bit. He says it's applied research. Now, applied research is research that's conducted in the setting in which it is used. That would be conducted in a classroom setting with real students versus basic research conducted apart from the context. That would be brain imaging research, that would be eye movement studies, all important, but it is not applied research. It does not meet this science of reading standard. Dr. Shanahan says the science of reading should refer to all empirical studies of any aspect learning to read, write, and spell. Empirical is based on observation and measurement of phenomena as directly experienced by the researcher. Okay, observation and measurement of phenomena. That could be qualitative research, couldn't it? I mean, you're observing, like Jane Goodall observing, like Marie Clay observing, like Piaget observing, that like Brian Camborne observing. Could be qualitative data, yes, no. No, not according to the U.S. Department of Education. Scientifically based educational research evaluated using experimental or quasi-experimental designs, appropriate controls, preference for random assignment experiments, designs contained within conditions or control. Okay, to be a true experiment, you must have random assignment to groups. Subjects must be randomly assigned to experimental or control groups. Now, the problem in education is students come pre-grouped. It's called classrooms. So they use what's called quasi-experimental design, which means, okay, they're already in groups, but we do some pre-measure to assure that the groups are relatively the same. So it's called quasi, just before you know. All right. So again, U.S. Department of Education says you only get funding, you only get grants if you use this very narrow type of research, experimental research with control and experimental groups and controlling all the variables. Okay. So the U.S. Department of Education came up with the Research and Education Act of 2002. Before that time, there were all these lovely qualitative research studies out there. But once the government got involved in defining what research is, and they give out the grants, that all this lovely qualitative research disappeared, and we have this very narrow view of reality. Off on a tangent, sorry about that. But that's similar to the standard employed by the good Dr. Shanahan and the National Reading Panel. When they were sifting through all the research, they said to determine that any instructional practice should be widely adopted, the belief, assumption, or claim supporting the practice should be causally linked to a particular outcome. The highest standard is an experimental study. A randomized experimental or quasi-experimental study is conducted. So Dr. Shanahan gets us back to that experimental study to determine a causal link, that one thing causes the other thing to occur. That's what we're trying to find out. What things cause reading to occur? Now, here's on a little aside, by the way, the National Reading Panel. That's the holy book to some in the science of reading. And like many holy books, the adherents do not read their holy book. They read summaries of it. You should actually read this thing. But the National Reading Panel came up with the big 5 pillars of reading instruction because that's what they were looking for. That's what they started out with. The pillars didn't arise from the research literature. They decided to look in each of these 5 pillars. So of course they came up with 5 pillars. Duh. But the thing is, there was nothing new here. We were doing 5 pillars long before the National Reading Panel came along. So it's kind of like Columbus discovering America, the National Reading Panel discovering the 5 pillars. And by the way, the 5 pillars are about 7 pillars short of a full load. These are 5 parts. There's actually 12 or 13 essential elements, and that is another discussion. But back to the science of reading definition. Refers to a general consensus among researchers about the strategies and practices that lead to improved outcomes. Okay, we generally have a consensus. We agree on these. Strategies and practices have been determined to be effective using experimental or quasi-experimental research. Not my definition, but that's theirs. Okay. True experiments use random assignment. Okay. Research will have established, and this is an important one, a causal variable between strategies and practices and outcomes. This strategy practice leads to that outcome, which is improved reading. Research will have been conducted in an actual classroom learning environment. Yes. And according to the advocates, this is the standard that should be used to make all decisions related to reading instruction and policy. Okay. They usually are referring to a set of pedagogical strategies and practices involving some form of direct instruction. And we're going to explore that in just a minute. And there's a lot of research related to direct instruction because it's easy to control the variables and it's easy to measure. So the basic science of reading definition to get through all the gobbledygook is this: using strategies and practices shown to be effective using controlled experimental or quasi-experimental research and conducted in classroom settings. Let's just let that sink in. The problem is this standard is not consistently applied by science of reading advocates when identifying problems and solutions. Oh, there's a problem in reading. Well, you're not using these standards. It's because they're not teaching phonics. That's an I thinkism. It's not using science of reading research standards. But even though I think that definition is kooky and represents a very narrow view of reading reality, like looking at reading reality through a peephole, dramatic pause, I could live with it if science of reading advocates would hold themselves to the same standard. That is, if mandated programs, curriculum, and policies were all based on that which was shown to be effective using controlled experimental research and conducted in classroom settings, and it is not, and why is LETRS given a free pass? Why are they given a free pass? Why are they not held to the same standards that science of reading advocates are trying to hold teachers and professors to? So let's take a look at LETRS, shall we? LETRS. Literally thousands of studies supported by hundreds of millions, all right, thousands of studies. So we should be able to find at least one or two if there's thousands of them out there. So in examining LETRS, I wanted to use their standards. Controlled experimental, quasi-experimental research conducted in a classroom. And I wanted to find that causal link between LETRS professional development and these two things: a teacher's ability to teach reading effectively and or readers' ability to read effectively. Would LETRS have any impact on one of those. And if it was real science, they'd compare LETRS to some other professional development programs. And I had these nice science of reading research standards all printed out here. Now, Dr. Moats and the LETRS minions would have us believe that if teachers just had the right kind of knowledge, her kind of knowledge, then all the problems would vanish. They could teach reading effectively, these pesky reading problems would go away, and life would be wonderful. Unicorns would dance. Now, she is partly correct. Having a body of knowledge is an essential component of expertise in any domain, including teaching. Yes, you need a body of knowledge. You need content knowledge. You need pedagogical knowledge. You need pedagogical content knowledge, and you need knowledge of learners and learning. Yes. The real question has always been, what kind of knowledge is important? And Dr. Moats claims that her kind of knowledge is important. If teachers just had my kind of knowledge, she said, and she comes down from on high with her LETRS knowledge. Here it is, she says. If you would have this knowledge, you could teach reading effectively. And the reason why there's this alleged reading crisis is because teachers don't have this knowledge. You think I'm being sarcastic, but this is the message that's coming across. Here is the irrefutable logic of Dr. Moats. A, LETRS professional development equals B, more effective teaching. Okay. B, more effective teaching equals C, higher levels of reading achievement. Okay. Therefore, A, LETRS equals C, higher levels of reading achievement. Okay. Also, A equals D, the solution to all reading problems. A is greater than E, all other forms of teacher professional development. Okay. F, all teacher programs, is less than A, LETRS professional development. This logic is irrefutable. Irrefutable. However, there's a monkey wrench in the fly ointment. There is no causal link from A to B, C, D, or E. No comparative research showing that A is greater than other forms of professional development, or that teacher preparation programs are less than A, which is LETRS. No causal research. Her empirical data, in quotes, consists of a lot of perceptions, observations, and surveys if you actually read her research. So we have to ask the question, is the knowledge of Louisa Moats better than the knowledge of others? Is her knowledge better than the knowledge of Richard Allington? Better than the knowledge of Marie Clay? Better than the knowledge found in an owner's manual for an Evinrude outboard motor? Has that comparison been made? So, someone asked, what are the 12 essential practices, elements? That's another one. All right, using or misusing the teaching algorithm. It's all about the algorithm. The algorithm. An algorithm is a formula or a specific set of steps for solving a problem. A, B, C. It's a step-by-step set of procedures that leads to a specific outcome. We know them in math and computer science. A plus B, you follow specific steps in a specific order and you get a specific answer. Now, many have tried to apply this to education, with the outcome being learning or learning to read. If you do that and that and that, you will get that. That's what structured literacy is, by the way. Now, algorithms are useful for mathematics and computer science. They always lead you to the same solution. But for human beings mucking around in a classroom, not so much. We are not standardized entities. There are far too many variables to try to control this. Now, here are some variations on the teaching algorithm: programmed instruction, criterion referenced instruction, Kansas learning strategies, direct instruction. We're going to take a look at some of them. But the common assumption is that if you follow the algorithm explicitly, you're guaranteed to have learning at the end. It's seen as the solution to all the problems. If you just follow the algorithm, eliminate the teacher, just follow the algorithm. Just do what the manual tells you. What's wrong with you? You'll eliminate all learning problems. The problems why children aren't learning to read is because they're not following the algorithm, you see. Don't you know anything, you silly bald professor? And if students don't learn, what do? You run them through the algorithm again, or you find another algorithm. They're not learning, we'll just run them through it again and again and again. And structured literacy is a variation of the teaching algorithm. Now, the elements of effective instruction, okay, yes. Everybody believes that direct instruction should be used. But it is a pedagogical strategy, not a method or approach. When you're teaching a skill, absolutely. Everyone believes you should have input. You should have modeling and demonstration, guided practice, independent practice, revisit and review. Absolutely. Everybody believes this. But it should never become a method of teaching. It's one small part of teaching skills. It is not a reading curriculum. And therein lies the problem. Our science of reading, our good friends in the science of reading, are trying to make direct instruction a method of teaching. That you just do direct instruction and children will learn how to read. Here's 6 examples of past teaching algorithms. Benjamin Bloom, remember him, 1956. Identify a measurable objective and teach it. Learning's a behavior. Students demonstrate the behavior, then learning has occurred, just like you do with mice in a Skinner box. Robert Major, same thing, performance-based objectives. He had his 4 things here and his principles, okay? 1962, this was when behaviorism was taken root. Everything happens in a context, a social context. 65, Gagne's 9 events of instruction. If you would just do this, then learning will occur. Of course, what could be more simple? B.F. Skinner jumped in, of course. Set your goals, determine, yes, proceed, yes, implement, yes, record your results. Teaching machines, what could be more simple than that? Madeline Hunter in the late 70s had her 7 steps. And here's the thing. It was designed originally to have conversations around teaching, but people got their hands on it, became an algorithm, and then a method of evaluation. And all teachers were put into this, had to put their lessons into this algorithm, and it became cumbersome. Now, it's flexible if it could be used in certain situations. I found situations where Madeline Hunter's steps helped me, but when I had to put every lesson through this algorithm, it became cumbersome and it actually impeded my ability to teach. And it's a form of direct instruction, but there's no research to support that Madeline Hunter is better than any other form of lesson plan. And the latest algorithm that's still being used, and I don't understand this, is the Danielson framework, and she has her 10 things here. And she has 4 domains constructed professional teaching, and those 4 domains were broken into 22 components and subcomponents broken into 76 teeny tiny elements. And each of these teeny tiny elements had research to support it. And they put each of these teeny tiny elements on a 4-point scale and used it to rate teachers. And that's just kooky talk. And they thought that since each of these 76 teeny tiny elements had research to support it, if you put them all together, you can call it a research-based thing. But there was never any research comparing Danielson to some other form of lesson planning. And again, the basic science of reading standards of research were never applied to this. And even Danielson said, you can't break down the complex acts of teaching into a set of skills. And that's what people have been trying to do throughout time. Teaching is a science, but it's also an art and it's a craft. Kansas strategies is just a series of algorithms, all forms of direct instruction. Teaching is a now do this, now do that, now do that. The teacher becomes a technician, just implementing these different strategies. And there'll be another shiny new thing coming down the line, absolutely, when this structured literacy thing fades away. There'll be something else. So let's look at some of the primary research conducted by the good Dr. Moats. Now again, causal variable. I was looking for a causal link between LETRS professional development and teachers' ability to teach reading effectively, or readers' ability to read effectively. And I was looking for a comparison between LETRS and other forms of professional development. That should not be too much to ask of the thousands upon thousands and literally thousands of studies. But here's 4 important things to know about research. First of all, it's a process of asking questions and using a systematic process to collect data to answer those questions. And you use logical inferences to make conclusions based on the data. Conclusions should be based solely on the data. And that's where Dr. Moats falls a little short. She collects a bunch of data, and then she just comes to all sorts of conclusions based on things other than the data. She will collect some data and comes to all sorts of conclusions, go well beyond the data, I'm trying to say, and making conclusions. She'll say whatever she wants to say. She'll say a bunch of baloney, not based on the data, and then call the baloney research-based. And it's the baloney-based conclusions that are problematic. You can collect data, but you can't come to conclusions that are not based on the data. Yes, it's statistically significant, but statistically significant baloney is still baloney. Conclusions are based solely on the data. So, one of her research, this is 1994, this was cited in her white paper. It's on the Lexia website, and I would encourage you to read that, but actually look at the research studies. And sadly, my life is such that I looked at every one of these. And it was used to support 2 propositions. Teachers need more training in phoneme awareness and phonics, and many adults who become teachers of reading do not have fully developed phoneme awareness or an understanding of why words are spelled the way they were. That's the proposition that Dr. Moats made, not me. Okay, in this study, 89 students were taking an elective course, not a required, but an elective course, so they didn't know much about it, called Reading, Spelling, and Phonology, meaning they wanted to know more about it, so they took the course. And in this study, there was an equal disposition of classroom teachers, yes, but speech pathologists, reading teachers, classroom teaching assistants, and graduate students. So it wasn't all classroom teachers, was it? Also, it was published in the Annals of Dyslexia. Now, this is going to be a little snarky, but if you can't get published in a real journal, you create your own. That's what the Annals of Dyslexia is. It comes from the International Dyslexia Association that used to be the Orton Society. International Dyslexia, Bulletin of the Orton Society, meaning that I could write an article, but the chances are very slim that I would ever get it published in the Annals of Dyslexia. So Dr. Moats gave a survey on what she thought was important for teaching reading. Identify an inflection and inflected word form. Explain when CK was used. Explain Greek spelling. She decided that this was essential. She decided that. She just made it up. Now, here's the thing. Orthographic mapping is a thing. Yes, it is. That means letters are stored based on letter patterns. Okay. But semantic mapping is more of a thing. When you hear the word cat, you don't think of short A words. You think of cat things. You think of furry and pet. But the thing about orthographic mapping, and that's where she's coming from with this linguistic knowledge, it led to the orthographic mapping thing. It makes sense if you're an adult with an adult mind looking at it. I've had people take the LETRS course and they said, oh, it makes sense to me now. Of course, you have an adult mind. But a child at the pre-operational stage and concrete operational stage, not so much. It's an abstraction. Very much like sentence diagramming. I had that in seventh and eighth grade in the 60s and 70s. Makes a lot of sense if you're a grammarian, if you're a good writer. If you're a kid learning this stuff, makes no sense at all. There's no meaning there. So Dr. Moats said that this knowledge is neither necessary nor sufficient to be an effective reading teacher. That has never been established. And in this research, there were no research questionnaire, just a survey on what she thought was important. Then she said a bunch of stuff. But yet that study is often used to generalize about teachers' knowledge and to make dispersions on teacher education programs. And I disperse her research. That's horrible. Her second one, again, Annals of Dyslexia, a 3-year study, kindergarten teachers, second and third grade teachers, third and fourth grade teachers, given a survey. Not surprisingly, she found surprising gaps in teacher insights about learning to read, meaning she gave a survey on what she thought was important, and they didn't score what she thought she should. Now, in the abstract and discussion section of this article, she tried to make the connection to students' reading achievement level and teachers' teaching competence. And here's where the algorithm comes in. She assumes teaching competence. She used a measure, the Texas teacher appraisal system, that really looks at a top-down direct instruction teaching algorithm. This measured direct instruction, and it was a rating instrument on direct instruction, not good literacy instruction. So if she's doing professional development that focuses on direct instruction, I would hope that when you rate and observe, teachers are going to score higher on that measure of direct instruction. And this is her reading, okay, letter word identification, not creating meaning with print, word attack of nonsense words, not creating meaning, passage comprehension, maybe. Very weak, very weak. But concluded, teachers who attended professional development courses regularly scored higher on knowledge surveys than those with low or no attendance. And I'm saying, brilliant. Who would have thought? That's your conclusion? That's used to justify? And again, basic science of reading standards not followed. Okay, that's Dr. Moats. I'm sure letters with the millions upon millions of dollars that Lexia is pulling in, they should be able to come up with some research. If you go on their website, you'll see this thing called Lexia LETRS Efficacy Research. Yes, you will. I'm not making this up. So these should demonstrate the causal link. And one would think that one could find at least one of the literally thousands of controlled experimental studies. One would think that's the science of reading standard, one would think. I examined, there were 18 research studies that Lexia said constitutes the evidence base for letters. Their quote, constitutes the evidence base for letters. Lexia said that, not me. Lexia grouped the efficacy research into 3 categories. Peer-reviewed publications, there were 2 of the 18. Third party, 4, and doctoral dissertation, there were 12 of these. All are pathetic, as you will see, but only 2 were published in peer-reviewed publications. Let's take a look at just these 2 first. Here they are, the 2 of them. Now, this is the weaselly thing. You'll see a difference in how LETRS described the research. And then I went to the abstract of the study and found, these don't sound alike at all. Lexia described this study using the term letters 5 times in 138 words, and the authors didn't use the term at all because this was not a study about letters. It compared literacy coaches to no literacy coaches. The results suggest benefits of a model of professional development in reading that included school-based coaching for first-grade teachers. The study had nothing to do with letters. You can see the Lexia description, letters-based seminar, letters-based, letters-based, letters. All right, the actual abstract. We compare the response of first-grade teachers to a model of professional development that did not include a literacy coach. PD coach or no PD coach. Had nothing to do with letters. Weasels. Weasels. Pardon my term. The second one. Again, the Lexia description mentions letters. The actual abstract, not at all. Because the study looked at reading programs with explicit instruction and compared children with learning disabilities and speech language disabilities to those without. That's what the study looked at. Had nothing to do with letters. Now, here's the Lexia description, letters training. But even Lexia said the analysis does not compare the Reading First program to a comparison, okay? Causal conclusions about the intervention cannot be drawn, okay? The actual study, okay, identified with or without speech, language, or learning disabilities in the context of explicit instruction. Findings suggest that children with LDSLD labels demonstrate significantly slower growth compared to children without. Okay, nothing about letters. Nothing. Letters? No. No. None of these studies, efficacy, would support science of reading muster. Specific question? No. Actual learning environment? No. 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 Conclusions based on the data? No. The second one, there was 4 third-party evaluations. Here's the thing about third-party evaluations. It's not research. Research is not research unless or until there has been blind peer review. And the descriptions by Lexia are not what's in the report at all. And many of these have nothing to do with letters. Here's a weaselly thing. One of the evaluations conducted by the American Institute for Research was sold to Cambion Learning, which owns Lexia, which publishes letters. None of these made a causal link between letters and teachers' ability to teach reading or children's reading achievement, and none of them compared letters to other forms of professional development. There is no research to support letters. And the last one, and we're making very good time here. We'll have plenty of time for questions. Theses and dissertations. They called it dissertations, but there was at least one, maybe two master's theses. I don't want to appear to be a research snob, but dissertations are your first work, not your best work when you're going through a doctoral program. The research was not conducted at respected research institutions. Many of them are from small private schools. An EDD is a practitioner's degree, not to demean that, but it's not a research degree. When I looked at the people who are on the committees, there were no major literacy scholars. Many times they came from departments outside of literacy. 6 of the 12 studies conducted in fields or departments other than literacy. Expertise matters when conducting research. You need to know what questions to ask, what data to collect, how to collect the data. And I'd ask you, would you want your gallbladder operation based on a doctoral dissertation from a small private college? With all the Lexia money, that was the best that they could do. So, conclusions, and my clock management is just excellent. It's about 4 minutes before 7 o'clock. So, baloney meter. You can use sciencey words, but that doesn't make it scientific. A lot of sciencey words here. You can do complicated statistical analysis of baloney, but that only gives you statistically significant baloney. There's no causal research linking letters with teacher effectiveness or student reading achievement. If I'm wrong here, please send me the research. Please do. And I'll do a whole new webinar. I'll make a whole bunch of new videos and podcasts. Just send me that research. There's no research comparing letters professional development with other forms of professional development. And again, if I am wrong, I will humbly beg your apology, and I'll make a new webinar. I'll do a new webinar and make more videos. There's no research comparing letters knowledge with other types of knowledge. There simply is not. Maybe I didn't see it. Orthographic mapping may be a thing, but semantic mapping is more of a thing. And I'll be looking at that in another presentation. Dr. Moats, what can we conclude? Either she doesn't know better or she knows better and does it anyway. And both of them are scary propositions. What is it that she does? Making these false claims, misusing and misappropriating research, coming to conclusions on things other than the data, misusing data, misciting data, putting out a proposition and citing something that has nothing to do with the proposition. Either she doesn't know better or she knows better and does it anyway. They're both scary. We must always question the premise of science reading claims and letters. If someone says something, if someone says research says, give me at least one study. My favorite one, whole language has been debunked. Oh, debunked by who? Show me the debunkerators, please. Is there a debunkerating committee? Always look to see what is measured and how. We owe it to ourselves to actually look at the research. When someone says research says, no, you can't just say research says. You have to cite your research. You'll see a lot of it is baloney. Always look in these studies who was and wasn't included in the population. You look at Dr. Moats' research, that one where she just has a bunch of students in her class and gave them a survey and then tried to generalize to all teachers. Crazy, crazy. All right, that is the end of my presentation. I'm going to shut up now, and I will be happy to take questions that you might have. And you can, very good. You can type your questions in the question part or in the chat, either one. Letters does not meet, yes. Thank you. Good. Glad you found it helpful. I tried to get a lot in the 60 minutes because I know here comes a question in the question and answer. What does LETRS training consist of? That's a good question. You have to pay lots of money, $1,500 for each one. And I bought one of the LETRS books, and people say, well, how can you make those decisions about LETRS if you have not taken the course? Here's the thing. I read the white paper. I read the Dyslexia efficacy research. Why would anyone with a rational mind, after reading that, spend 1 cent on anything LETRS related? I did buy a used copy of LETRS, and it's baloney. It is absolutely baloney. It's not research-based. LETRS training consists of paying lots of money. And here in the state of Minnesota, it's one of, they're spending $100 million on this baloney. It just boggles my mind that money could be used to buy real books. How do we get this information to administrator and decision makers? I'm making a recording of this, and I'll send it out to all people who are registered. I'll send this out tomorrow. Okay. Question. Okay. Any more questions? Very good. Yes, a lack of research. It is expensive. It is very expensive. Yes, being forced to take LETRS right now and you want to stand up and scream. People say it makes a lot of sense. It may make sense to an adult mind who knows this stuff, but that's not how children come to view the world. They're trying to make meaning of it. Approximately 168 hours of work over 2 years. Can you imagine that? What do you recommend instead? What do I recommend instead of LETRS? Knowledgeable teachers. Take graduate classes. Subscribe to good, legitimate journals. The Reading Teacher. Just subscribe to The Reading Teacher. That's good practitioner-oriented knowledge. Start reading books. Go to conferences. There is no magic formula. There are only magic teachers. There's no magic program, just magic teachers who have knowledge. Has Louisa Moats ever taught a child to read? You look at her background. It's not an educational background. No. She's worked in tutor programs, but she's never been a classroom teacher. She's always worked, she's always about, well, I don't want to infer her motivation. But no, she has no classroom experience. Mari Clay, how we need her. Yes, we do. How to ban the 3Qing that contradicts on the ban on 3Qing. I'll be doing 3Qing at a conference coming up, and I hope to have another webinar at some point or a video on 3Qing. But there is more research. 3Qing. One of my graduate students says, 3Qing is not a strategy. It's not something you teach. It's just realizing the brain uses multiple sources of information. It's understanding how the brain works and just reinforcing how the brain works to recognize words. That's what the 3Qing system is. Yes, someone became suspicious of LETRS when Hanford started discrediting competition. Hanford is about money. Look to see who's paying Hanford. My Alexa app. Ask your Alexa app how much money she's worth. Not that that's always a good source, but she's worth much more than I am. Yes. Yes, we should counter-sue LETRS. If they think they can sue Lucy Calkins, for goodness sakes, her stuff is research-based. This LETRS is all about money. Letters training, yeah. You actually look at the citations that they cite, letters training. Look at the citation, look at the proposition. Then if you actually go to the study, oftentimes the study has nothing to do with the proposition in the letters material. Absolutely. Emily Hanford, they should call this the Hanford era. I want her to take full credit for this 10 years from now, when this stuff is going to be just laughed. Have you shared your research with the Minnesota Department of Education? They don't listen to me. I'm just a bald little yapping professor. Your district is being forced to take LETRS or OLA or some of this stuff. You know, the Minnesota Department of Education, they have to implement what the Minnesota legislature puts into law. So I'm very critical of the Minnesota Department of Education, but they have to follow their mandates. However, there's not enough people there pushing back. The reading rope, it's a ridiculous model based on the simple view of reading, and that's another conversation. There was evidence that Emily Hanford was a publicist for Louisa Moats. I haven't heard anything about that. Our district is doing OLA instead of LETRS. It's cheaper. It's the same thing. It's the same gobbledygook. There's no magic teacher professional development program. And here's the thing. The Minnesota has only 3 approved professional development program for teachers. And I can guarantee you that the good Dr. Johnson is not in any of those 3. Why is that? Not that I'm the best, but I know a little something about reading. Will the chat comments be recorded? I don't think so. I don't know about that. The lawsuit against Calkins is a golden opportunity, yes, to expose the falsehoods of the science of reading movement. The writing rope, these ropes are used to make money. That's all they're used for. Anyone have a question? I think I can, question, there we go, 14, yeah. Okay. Money ropes, oh yeah, I like to see that. We are seeing a move towards structured literacy with opponents say it's an evidence-based approach. Here's the thing with structured literacy. Again, like I said, they're forms of direct instruction. If you teach phonics, you're going to get, yes, a bump in phonics scores. That's evidence, but evidence of what? Does that transfer to creating meaning? Does it transfer to authentic literacy conditions? And no, there's little transfer when you teach sub-skills here and you read over there. Yes, evidence-based, but what kind of evidence? I mean, I could shock children with an electric shock and I could produce more of something. That would be evidence. That's a bad example, but all I could come up with on the top of my head. Just because it's evidence doesn't mean it's good evidence. And even this evidence has to be put in context. Evidence for who? For what purpose? Yes, there's evidence that phonics helps children decode words. Does that mean that evidence applies to 8th graders, to 4th graders, to kids who are already able to recognize words? Evidence for whom and for what? Your recording should be sent to Emily Hanford. Oh, I will post it on her X file, but I'm sure I've been blocked. Here's the thing I want you to know about LETRS. I've done YouTube critical of LETRS in the past. And the LETRS lawyers or somebody contacts the YouTube people and say, what do you call it? See, when everyone's looking at me, I get a brain fart. What do you call it? Trademark infringement. That's it. Trademark infringement. Trademark infringement. And they block my YouTube videos. They may block this one. And it usually takes me 2 to 4 weeks to get them up again. But they want to silence the people who are critical of them. How to support kids with dyslexia. And that's another one. Your school psychiatrist said kids need structured literacy. What does a school psychologist know about teaching reading? That's what I want to ask. School psychologists know about giving tests, which is different from reading. And we can do a whole nother thing on what dyslexia is and isn't. And that's, again, we have to question these assumptions. The idea, yes, the International Dyslexia made up the term structured literacy to sell products. Yeah, ask for a preemptive pardon. All right, any other good questions? If you want I'm going to type my email address. If you want a certificate, just send me an email tomorrow. Our conversation lacks nuance. Of course, students need phonics, but what about comprehension? Yeah. Comprehension should be addressed at the kindergarten and preschool level. Yes. And I can show you how to do that. But you lay the stones for comprehension. At the kindergarten level, a lot of the comprehension is related to sentence. Does the sentence make sense? Did you understand what I said or what I read? Why is there no national conversation about comprehension? Well, I'm having the conversation. I've done webinars before on this. But yeah, comprehension is one of the most under-taught, along with writing, things because people don't understand. Comprehending is thinking. To improve comprehension, we teach thinking strategies. All right. Any other questions? I know I drank way too much coffee tonight before I did this one. Background with Fountainus and Pinnell, I kind of know of them, but I try to swim in my own lane. I'm a meaning-based. I'm one of those whole language guys that doesn't apologize. If you disagree with Ken Goodman, actually read his stuff. Tell me what exactly you disagree with. Oh, he's telling children to guess. No, he's not telling children to guess at words. That's not what a psycholinguistic guessing game is. Read his stuff, for goodness sakes. Okay, people. I celebrate Ken Goodman. I celebrate Mari Clay. I celebrate Richard Allington. And I ask myself, who are going to be the next ones? Who of us are going to carry the torch? We cannot give up. Yes, we're going to get our nose bloodied with the science of reading. And it may take 2 years, it may take 10 years, but we're not going to give up because what we do is important. What we do is important for our children, but for a democratic society, to have children who can think and reason. And one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about literacy is the way that people interact. It's how we understand each other, writing and reading. It's how we create connections. All right. You didn't come to hear a sermon from me. I appreciated your attention. I will see you hopefully sometime. Take care, everybody.